Kia ora tātou. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to day 14 of these hearings. The first business for the Commission this morning is the submission by the Opihi Opuha Catchment Group. Who will speak for them?
Yes, it's me, Jason Grant, Chairperson of the Opihi and Opuha Catchment Group. Mr. Shepherd.
Thank you, Mr. Grant. Now, we have read the submission and we have read the evidence statement that you've provided. So you don't need to read those to us unless you want to. But we give you this opportunity now to speak to them by way of introductory remarks. And then when we've done that, we may well have some questions to ask of you about the submission.
Yes, thank you. I've just got a brief statement to read if it's okay.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. As said in our submission, our catchment group first met about 4 years prior to submitting on PC7. In this time, we spent hours learning about our catchment and the problems, the good things. This fueled a knowledge that gave us the confidence to put in a submission that was well informed and representative of our community. Going forward, catchment groups, I believe, are going to play an important role in getting the community involved and giving them ownership of environmental enhancements in local areas. Knowing the group's voice has been heard in this process will give us the confidence to carry on this good work. And also in the OTOP region, we're currently in the process of forming an incorporated society as a vehicle for catchment groups to apply for funding for environmental catchment work. Alongside this potential funding, there will be a requirement for farmers to contribute money towards the work if it is done on their farms. I would like you to be mindful when making decisions through this process that will have a financial impact on farmers, whether it's through increased compliance or will limit production and profitability on farm. Farms are capital hungry businesses, and for farmers to contribute to this work to provide environmental enhancements on farm, they will need genuine cash surpluses to do so. Without these surpluses, there is a risk that these projects will simply not just go ahead. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Grant. Clearly, you've got the hang of how to present something in a neat summary that is interesting and informative, and we're grateful to you.
Thanks.
Now, there may be one or two questions. Even so. Commissioner Van Voorthuizen?
No questions, but I note from your evidence that you do support the Flow and Allocation Working Party and the Adaptive Management Working Group and the relief that they've asked for, so just take note of that. Thank you.
Thanks, yeah.
Commissioner Solomon?
No questions from me, thank you.
Well, that demonstrates, doesn't it, Mr. Grant, how clear and easy to understand what your submission is, your evidence is, and your introductory remarks now. There's no questions for you, and we thank you very much for coming, and those who've come to support you as well. Thank you indeed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners.
Now, the next submission that we come to is Synlait. Now, in respect of Synlait, we have the original submission. We have the evidence statement of Andrew Bull, the evidence statement of Tim Ensor, and legal submissions. So if Council will proceed.
Thank you, sir. Oh, that's now definitely going. Just a practical matter initially. So you have the evidence of Andrew Bull as flagged at paragraph 4 of my submissions. There has been a change of personnel at Synlait Foods and Talbot Forest Cheese. So to my right is Mr. Steve McComb, who will be, he's going to give you a brief rundown of his experience and qualifications, which obviously differ from Mr. Bull. But he will be well placed to answer questions of a practical nature or around the Talbot Forest Cheese works. I
wonder whether it would be appropriate if Council would introduce herself to us.
Apologies. Jamie Robinson appearing for for Synlait, Duncan Cottrell.
Thank you.
So the matters of the submission, as you'll know and have read, were quite broad, but the matters which evidence has been presented on is narrowed to 2 key issues: the transfer of water permits for industrial purposes and flexibility for practical solutions where policies and rules require nutrient loss reductions from both industrial and farming activities. This has been covered in some detail in both my submissions and the planning evidence of Mr. Ensor, so I don't propose to go through it any further than that unless it would assist prior to questions.
Well, I did have a question that I was going to ask if the appropriate opportunity arose concerning something in the original submission, and I'm content for you to decide at what time you'd like me to do that, but there may be some other questions that we have to ask as well.
Sure. I think I will be the best person to address anything on the original submission, as Mr. McComb is here purely from a Talbot Forest Cheese perspective, and Mr. Ensor's scope of evidence has been fairly narrowed. So I'm happy to take that question now, or if you would like to hear from both Mr. McComb and Mr. Ensor in advance, then that's fine too. I'm in your hands, sir.
Well, if you look at paragraph 22 of the submission, if I've got the right document in front of me. Now, if I've got the same document as I think you will have,
Yes.
You're talking in this paragraph about rules which implement policies with long-term vision should reflect the life of the plan.
Yes.
My first question about that is, what do you say the life of the plan is?
So that, just to preface this, I suppose, the submission was obviously written under the previous national policy statement. I'm conscious that the 2020 freshwater management policy statement has been introduced since the time of this submission. which does have a much more mandated, I suppose, approach to long-term water quality. So that's a disclaimer before I get started. The life of the plan, when writing this, we were talking there about the 10 years or thereabouts that a plan will go through prior to needing to be reviewed under the RMA.
So it's a possibility that occurs to me that businesses like your clients and many other perhaps larger suppliers even of Synlait sometimes have to consider investments with lives that are longer than 10 or 15 years. And I wonder whether it's capable of being useful for potential investors to know what regulatory expectations they might have in the intermediate term, say twice as long as I've mentioned, as best they can be assessed now, but not so as to preclude later revision as time passes and experience indicates.
Yes, and I would agree with your statement there. I think that the submission there was a policy framework which indicates the way in which, for example, freshwater management will be dealt with looking forward longer than that 10-year period of the life cycle of the plan. The submission point related to the rules in particular. So if there is guidance in the policy document or in the objectives and policies around reductions in 10, 20, maybe 30 years, that is appropriate, but whether the setting of rules which appear to extend beyond that period is appropriate was the point that the submission intended to raise.
Well, we're making some progress. We're getting down now to a refinement that might be helpful for me to understand. I think, especially speaking, as you remind me, in the context of the new NPS, you're acknowledging that there's a place for something in the policy framework indicating likely or expected management techniques for the future, perhaps the intermediate future, beyond what you call the life of the plan. Are you saying that it's inappropriate or inadmissible for the regional plan to have rules which indicate application beyond that period?
I don't think I would go so far as that, so particularly given the new NPS. I think there's probably two further comments to make here that might assist. The first one is that as part of this submission, as you would have seen, there was real support from Synlait for increased measurement of water quality and being able to base, the next plan cycle on significantly more certain data than was perhaps or has been available in the past. The more information that is available, the better the decision making. And so that submission point was partially to flag that long-term rules, which admittedly are still subject to review in the normal course of things, may not be as helpful if there is increased information that's been fed in as the monitoring continues to improve. The other point that I make is that Synlait has obviously chosen not to present evidence on this matter, partially because it was being picked up by other industry groups and in particular by Dairy NZ. And so I am aware that there has been, I think, a concession from Dairy NZ or an acceptance of the appropriateness of reductions that identify both a 2030 and potentially a 2040 date, is my understanding of their evidence. And so already that is potentially extending what was in the Synlait submission, but that has been the decision of Synlait to abide by, or to let Dairy NZ and others run that argument.
So should I understand that this point that is made in paragraph 22 of the submission is no longer being pursued?
Yes, that's correct, sir. There's no evidence before you to support or to be supporting that position, and that's a conscious decision that Synlait has chosen.
Well, that's helpful. Thank you, Ms. Robinson. I'm grateful to you for clarifying that for me.
Thank you.
Now, do you wish to present Mr. McComb next?
Yes, I think that would probably make sense, and then Mr. Ensor after that.
Thank you and good morning. My name is Stephen McComb.
Welcome.
I'm the Site Operations Manager at Synlait Foods, Talbot Forest, and I've been in this role since the 5th of October this year. I've been involved in the dairy industry for the last 24 years, and I hold a Bachelor's in Science with a major in Food Science.
Thank you. And you're going to speak, well, you're going to take any questions that we would have been addressing to Mr. Ball, is that right?
That's correct, sir.
And so do you adopt the statement that he's made as your evidence?
I do, sir. I've read it thoroughly and I agree with his commentary.
Splendid. Well, thank you very much. Any questions for Mr. McComb, Commissioner Van Voorthuizen?
No questions, thank you.
Any questions, Commissioner Solomon?
No questions from me either, thank you.
Well, that was easy start, wasn't it, Mr. McComb?
It was, thank you.
Shall we come then to Mr. Ensor, Ms. Robinson? Good morning, Mr. Ensor.
Good morning, Commissioners. I think the main issues have been covered fairly well by Mr. Robinson, and I'm happy to move directly to any questions that you may have.
Yes, all right. Thank you. Thank you for coming in again, Mr. Ensor.
No problem at all.
Any questions, Commissioner Van Voorthuizen?
Yes, thank you. Just the two issues you raised, Mr. Ensor, are transfers and then the industrial discharges. I just note the point you make in your evidence that in terms of the transfer issue, we did consider that in variation 1 and understand the points you're making there about consistency, etc. On the matter of the industrial discharges, have you got a copy of the plan in front of you? I just want to ask you to have a look at 14.4.28.
Yes, I have that in front of me.
And you've recommended some amendments there to address the Synlait's concern. Are you familiar with the evidence presented by Fonterra, who raised similar issues?
I'm actually not, sorry.
Okay, well, I'll ask you a question anyway. So Gerard Willis, their planning witness at his paragraph 111, he suggested a different solution to the same issue, and he suggested replacing the word losses. Do you see where it says in the second line, reduced nitrogen losses? He just suggested that the issue could be solved by replacing the word losses with the word load. And so maybe if you have an initial response to that, I'd appreciate that. But if you'd like to go away and think about that and perhaps discuss it with Mr. Willis, then I'd be happy for you to come back later as well on that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I guess as an initial comment, ideally the the nitrogen, and in this case away from Talbot Forest, would be addressed as a fertiliser input to any overseer that might appear on farm, and so on the face of it, a load makes sense. But yeah, look, would be appreciative of the opportunity to give it a little further thought and have a look at that. So thank you.
Okay, thanks for that.
Commissioner Solomon?
Yes, I do. And it's with regard to nutrient discharges, your paragraphs 7 to 22. During the course of this hearing, and again yesterday, we heard some sobering facts about nitrates in private bores and community water supplies and the adverse effects on human health as a result of nitrates being ingested by people derived from groundwater, where research suggests it causes colorectal cancer and infantile, I think they call it blue baby syndrome. We've also received evidence that links excess nitrogenous pasture fertilisation and groundwater nitrate contamination causing cancer in the bladder, breast and thyroid as an outcome from ingesting nitrate-laden water and foods such as vegetables, for instance. In Professor Robbins Fraser's evidence, his research suggests that nitrates are linked to other health effects such as dementia and diabetes as well. So coming back to your paragraph 7 to 22 and your social responsibility, I wonder if Synlait has undertaken any similar research to be responsible for their discharge of whey and waste. And I was actually going to ask this of Mr. Ball, but I didn't want to put the new person on the spot, so I'm asking you.
Look, I'm not aware of any, I'm sorry, and it probably is a question best answered by Synlait. I'm not sure if Mr. McComb has any view, but yeah, so I'm sorry, I just actually don't think I'm the best person to answer your question, unfortunately.
Would you like to answer, Mr. McComb?
I can certainly attempt to answer. So is your question, should we engage in research into these effects, or should we be monitoring for nitrates?
Well, I just wanted as to be socially responsible. My question is, has Synlait undertaken any similar research to be responsible for their nutrient discharges?
I'm not aware of any. We absolutely will be monitoring our whey discharge, so that is something that we take very seriously, and we would be looking to monitor that closely.
Okay, so is your answer yes or no?
The answer is no, that I'm aware of at this stage, but moving forward we would be looking to do that, yes.
Great, thank you. That's my only question, thank you.
Well, I have no question for Mr. Ensor in this statement. So, Ms. Robbins, unless there's something you wish to say by way of closing remarks, we can say thank you for coming.
I wonder if I might just address briefly the question that Commissioner Solomon has raised.
You may.
I think it made its way into the submission originally. In terms of the, it is here, sorry, at paragraph 14 of the covering letter that accompanied the submission, just outlines Synlait's sustainability strategy. And so I think from a social responsibility perspective, although individual studies may not be happening, there is certainly a significant drive in-house at Synlait in terms of both on-farm and off-farm, so the industrial side of the process around nutrient reduction, water reduction, making environmental gains where possible, and that is reflected in the Lead with Pride program, for example, which actually incentivises farmers who are achieving under the 4 pillars, one of which is environmental sustainability. So whether or not that assists with your question, I'm not sure, but just and by way of reply, it might be helpful.
It is
So-
reassuring to know that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So is Council referring to paragraph 14, where the heading is sustainability strategy?
Yes, that's correct. And so
Yes.
14 and 15
Yes.
just explain the sustainability strategy that was released in 2018 and some of the, I suppose, the key differences between how that strategy, what that has been based on, and the Plan Change 7 process, just to understand where those numbers may differ slightly and why that's been raised. But that's correct, sir. That's the paragraph I was referring to.
Yes, I'm grateful to you for that. And we're grateful to the 3 of you for coming to represent the submission and speak to it as you have. And we'll thank you for it.
Thank you very much.
Now, the next submission that we have this morning is Mulligan, Kerse and Kingston.
Morning, Commissioners. My name is Bridget Irving. I'm counsel for the submitters.
Good morning,
Yeah.
Ms. Irving. Yes, we remember you from a previous
Yes,
hearing in this series, so welcome.
thank you.
Good to see you again.
Thank you, sir. To my left, I have Mr. Pierce, who's assisting me, and to my right, currently, I have Mr. Mulligan, one of the submitters. What I intend to do is call our witnesses up, just so there's not a lot of space at this front table, if that suits the panel.
Yes, but however it suits you, we'll be very pleased with. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll start with just the legal submissions that were filed on, I think it was Monday. Hard to keep track these days. I wasn't intending to take you through those in any detail. There was just one, I suppose, substantive error that I picked up when I was reviewing it, or I think actually Mr. Craw picked up for me, which was a result of some clumsy drafting on my behalf at paragraph 59. And I'd just like to amend that paragraph so that it
Just a pause a moment while I pick it out, please. 59. Yes, thank you.
So on the third line, the sentence starting, "This means that," if you could
Yes.
just delete the words "the impact from a dry season on." So the sentence would then read, "This means that profitability is reduced," etc.
Means that profitability is reduced and the frequency, yes. Very well. Will I admit that?
Thank you, sir.
So, anything else like to say by way of your introductory remarks?
Not really. I think obviously the key issue for these submitters is the flow management regime for what we call the Upper Coopers Creek subcatchment. And through our evidence and submissions, we're proposing that the minimum flow isn't a requirement, and that flow and ecological values of this area of Coopers Creek can be managed appropriately by the maximum take rate and annual allocation limit on the permit holders in the subcatchment, and that achieves a superior outcome both in terms of ecological flows or outcomes, but also in enabling the submitters to provide for their economic and social well-being. So that is in essence the crux of what we want to talk to you about today.
Well, that's splendid. Since you put the submission in, we've had the new NPS FM commence in operation. Does that lead to any alteration to the way in which you're expressing that particular aspiration by your clients?
Clearly we need to evaluate it in light of the NPS 2020's objective and the priority regime that objective establishes. And I think in doing that, and I've set that out I think in the discussion in my legal submissions, as you work your way through the evidence, I think it's clear that what we are promoting still achieves that objective, that the outcome in an ecological sense from what we are proposing is a good one, and the economic and social outcomes that are achieved by taking a, less blunt approach to flow management in this area is also a superior one. And Mr. Craw's evidence has been presented to help you understand the implications of the minimum flow on these water users, and obviously the evidence that they themselves present assists you in that regard. So I think it is clearly important, and you need to evaluate our proposal in light of the NPS, but I think when you do that, you will see that we are achieving that objective.
Well, thank you for that.
Thank you, sir. So I would first call Mr. Mulligan to speak to you about his evidence.
Well, good morning, Commissioners. Thanks for
taking... to you, Mr. Mulligan, and thank you for coming.
It's all right. Well, as stated in the written evidence, my name's Mark Mulligan, and our family farm is situated in the Coopers Creek area. Given that, and I'll make it short because I know you have written, given that you've my written evidence and a large amount of evidence being presented on my and my fellow submitters' behalf, I won't spend time repeating what has already been tabled. I will just say that over the 22 years we've been associated with this little stream, we've done a tremendous amount of planting, and the difference in 22 years in the enhanced nature of our little creek is quite something else to behold, actually, and we're all incredibly proud of it. And I'll just leave it at that. You have, read everything that is in the submission, and I'm happy to take any questions that the Commissioners may or may not have. Thank you.
Yes, well, thank you, Mr. Mulligan, and thank you for coming. We'll just bring out your evidence statement. Any questions for Mr. Mulligan, Commissioner Van Voorthuizen?
No, no questions, thank you.
Commissioner Solomon?
No questions, but I do want to commend Mr. Mulligan. I saw from some of the photos in Mr. Hickey's evidence the riparian plantings. I commend you for those, and I thank you.
Okay.
You're doing a great job.
Thank you very much.
Oh, I don't have any question to ask you either, Mr. Mulligan, and thank you for coming in.
Well, thank you very much. And
I'll call Mr. Kerse next. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Ian Kerse. I farm in the Upper Coopers Creek catchment and have done for, I suppose, basically my whole working life. The same as Mark said, my evidence is written there and I won't go through that. Just like to emphasise a couple of points. I've spent my whole working life developing this property, and with the knowledge and the use of irrigation, and the size of the property would not be economic without irrigation. And having worked with that 50 litre a second flow on Coopers Creek for some 12 years, sort of brought home to me that it just wasn't sustainable ongoing in the future, and it really annoyed me that we were being limited in what we could do for no significant or any no significant enhancement or gain for the creek itself. I firmly believed what we were pumping was having no significant harm on the creek, and to penalise us, penalise our business because of that was quite frustrating for me. Yeah. And also bearing in mind the value of my asset that I've put my whole life into is significantly hindered with a highly restricted or unreliable water right. And so if you've got any questions, I'm happy to try and answer them to my ability.
Yes, but you'll see, Mr. Kerse, I've been carefully noting what you've been saying, and we're very grateful that you've come in to explain how you see them.
Yep.
Any questions, Commissioner Van Voorthuizen?
No questions, thank you.
Questions, Commissioner Solomon?
No questions from me either, thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Kerse.
Mr. Kingston is our next witness.
Thank you. Just a moment, we'll find his. Good morning, Mr. Kingston.
Good morning, sir.
Thank you for your evidence statement.
Thank you, sir. Good morning,
Do you
fellow
want to speak
commissioners.
to that before we come to questions, if any?
I've got nothing really further to add to my statement, sir. Reiterating the previous two speakers, Mark and Ian. But I'm happy to take questions. My main comment is that the 50 litres a second minimum flow, as by my statement, is rather restrictive and hard to deal with, really. That's part of the submission. But I'm happy to take questions. Nothing else to add. Thank you, sirs. Madam.
Commissioner Van Voorthuizen?
No questions, thank you.
Commissioner Solomon?
No questions from me either.
So you can see, Mr. Kingston, that with whatever help you've had, you've presented a very clear and easy to understand statement, and we're grateful to you for that. And the fact that you've come in to answer for it adds to its understandability. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioners. Thanks for the opportunity.
Mr. McIndoe, our hydrologist, is the next witness. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, Mr. McIndoe.
Good morning, Commissioner Shepherd, again.
Yes, again. Now, you've given your professional statement.
Yes.
And we've read that, so we don't need to trouble you to read it to us. Do you have any introductory remarks before we see if there's any questions about it?
Yes, we'll just talk about that. There's just something I need to amend. Last week I realised that I had left out 38 hectares of irrigated area in my analysis for Mr. Mulligan's farm. And even though it doesn't change my conclusions one bit, I just wondered, for the purposes of accuracy, whether you would like some revised numbers on that.
Yes, well, certainly if your evidence is that there's an amendment to be made, then this is the time to make it.
Yes, how would you like me to do that? There are 3 tables that need to be changed, plus 3 or 4 numbers, I think, in the text.
Well, let's do the text amendments here and now.
Okay.
And let's ask you to send us in the revised tables, because that's a bit more inconvenient to do as it were on the fly in the course of the hearing.
Yes, that's correct. So
you give us the paragraph number.
The first paragraph number that needs to change slightly is 82. Paragraph 82.
Just a moment. Yes.
It says it includes 3 on the, this is the on-farm irrigation situations, 3 on the Kerse farm, 2 on the Kingston farm, and it should be and 2 on the Mulligan farm, to include the extra one that I left out. So 2 on the Mulligan farm, with all different parameters as described in table 2. Total irrigated area is, that needs to change to 445 hectares.
$445.
45. Yes.
Thank you.
Now, I'll give you a replacement for table 2. There's an additional line, a second line under Mulligan, that that will include 23 hectares of gun or other irrigation, but it's probably easier to see that in a table. I'll also replace table 3 because the irrigation demand percent of allocation numbers have changed slightly.
Yes, well, I think the better way to do it is just to do what you're offering and have replacement tables that then correctly match the evidence that you've now given.
Yeah, there's two other things. In paragraph 84, this is as a result of the table changing. Average demand is about, it says 76 at the moment. Can you change that to 78? I know these are small changes, but it's better to be accurate.
Evidence is evidence, and from somebody like you that we know well and we know your professional reputation, it's got to be right, hasn't it?
I agree. And so the other change that I'll submit to you later is a change to table A3, which is the reliability of the Mulligan farm.
Splendid. Well, Mr. McIntyre, if you would please send those revised tables in, and we would accept them as part of your evidence.
Thank you.
This is part of the correction process that our hearing is looking for.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any other introductory remarks that you wish to make, Mr. McIntyre?
Just some general comments, because I think my summary explains everything that I've looked at and what I've found.
Yes.
One of the key pieces of information that was missing from previous analyses was an estimate of mean annual low flow for Coopers Creek at the two sites, State Highway 72 and Mulligan's Weir. The fact now that we've got a number, 28 litres per second, that we've come up with, that I and Mr. Hickey agree with, I think is a very forward move. That we have a number to work to. The second point I want to make is that my job in this preparing this evidence here was to look at the impact of various minimum flow options, including the proposed Plan Change 7 option, on the reliability to the irrigators that you've heard from. And you'll see from my analysis that the reliability for the options such as proposed in Plan Change 7 is actually very, very poor. And I think the farmers have probably reinforced that. So that's a key point. And yeah, I think that's probably the two main things that my evidence addresses.
Thanks, Mr. McIntyre. Questions of this witness? Commissioner Van Voorthuizen?
No questions, thank you.
Commissioner Solomon?
No questions from me either, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Well, grateful as always, Mr. McIntyre, and glad to see you looking so well.
The same to you, Commissioner Shepherd. No, it's good to see you all again. Thank you very much.
I will call Mr. Hickey next. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Hickey.
Good morning.
We have a statement from you,
Yes.
which I take it you're here to confirm.
Yep. I'd like to confirm that statement of evidence. Yes.
Thank you. Any updates or corrections that you wish to bring to our attention?
No, sir.
And any other introductory remarks, or do we go to questions, if any?
I think it's probably best just to go to questions. I think Mr. McIntyre's covered off one of the main points around the mean annual low flow and that kind of thing, so I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. Commissioner Van Voorthuizen, any questions, Mr. Hickey?
Yes, thank you. So Mr. Hickey, appreciate the fact that yourself and Mr McIndoe have anticipated that an option for us is to retain a minimum flow in table 14H so as to be consistent with all the other tables in the plan.
Yep.
So I just have a question for you in terms of that at your paragraph 99. And do you have a copy of the table 14H as recommended to be amended by the section 42A report available to you?
Sure, we will.
That's in the consolidated recommendations from 10 July. Is that the one, most recent one? And table 14H.
Yes. So in your paragraph 99,
Yes.
just above the first bullet point, you say you consider a minimum flow of 10 litres a second would provide for the values present if allocation was capped based on actual use. And so my question to you is, looking at table 14H and the allocation limit for A permits that's recommended to us now, the figure of 218, is that what you mean by capped at actual use, or were you meaning a different number when you wrote that?
I've worked off what we're seeing and what was modelled by the other two experts on hydrology and demand. So that basis of actual use is what's driving that 7% reduction in flow that everyone's modelled. So I'd need to check exactly what their number is to go with that 218 in that table.
So I was going to ask Ms Johnson exactly the same question based on her paragraph 72.
Yeah.
So if you would need to confer with her to answer the question, perhaps Ms Johnson, can you able to answer that?
Yes, I can answer that when I come up, if that's right.
Or maybe just when you're called up, but yeah, okay.
Yep.
So Mr Hickey, once Ms Johnson gives her answer, if you want to add to what I've just asked you, then probably do that at that stage. Okay.
All right.
Commissioner, would it be a convenient way if we were to take a short break and enable those two witnesses to speak to each other?
Yes.
And then we'll come back to Mr Hickey's evidence and complete it then.
Yeah, that's an excellent idea, thank you.
So we'll take a 10-minute break and see where we go to from there.
Thank you, sir. Shall we
Now,
resume?
Mr. Hickey, are you ready now to continue with the colleague's questions?
Yes, I'll have a crack at explaining as best I can, but you will be able to follow up with one of our other witnesses if I don't quite explain it to your satisfaction. But basically I can confirm that that 218 number in the table is what we would expect for the upper Coopers Creek sub-catchment, but we are talking about splitting off the upper Coopers Creek or separating it slightly, our sub-catchment, which would result in a rate of 199 litres a second. And we would also advocate applying a maximum annual volume of 1.78 million metres cubed a year to these takes, in addition to that. And the reason for that goes back to the initial scenarios that were run in the hydrology reports from ECAN, which had actual use right through to maximum allocation use, which had quite a differing range on actual drawdown on the creek. And so we've focused on minimising the drawdown based on historic actual use, and for that reason the best way to lock that in was to propose that maximum annual volume along with those rates to take reductions, which are less than are on the paper consents as allowed by the maximum rates and volumes.
Yeah, I noted the volumetric figure in Ms Johnson's evidence. Look, it would help me to understand that if you could, not now, but go away and think about table 14H and come back with maybe one or two versions of it. One version where there's only a single Coopers Creek line, and then a minimum flow number, which I assume would be 10, but it may be some different number, and a permit allocation number in terms of litres per second, and then a version of the table that has a either one or two lines in it to differentiate between the upper and the lower Coopers Creek and what the relevant numbers in terms of minimum flow and a permit allocation would be, just so we have the two options available to us.
Yep.
And so rather than try and do that now, go away and confer amongst yourselves and come back to us on that. That would be very helpful, thanks. And maybe a version also that has that annual volume limit in it, just to see how that might look compared to what's currently in the plan.
Yep.
If I may, sir, there was some suggested drafting in Ms Johnston's appendix, which was the two-line solution that we are promoting. At page 7 of her appendix number 2. But we can also refine that with some options for you if that would assist.
Okay, I see that. Thank you. Yeah, that would be helpful. And it may not be very different to what's already there, but if you could just confirm that one way or another, that would be good. Thank you.
Certainly.
Any further questions of this witness, Commissioner?
No, that's all. Thank you.
Commissioner Solomon?
Yes, I do have 4 questions for Mr Hickey. After reading your paragraphs 46 to 52, just for clarification, from an ecological protection point of view, is 100 metres downstream of State Highway 72, as noted in your paragraph 70, the best place for a minimum flow gauge?
My preference would be to have it further up the stream in a perennial reach of stream that doesn't go dry naturally. However, based on this creek, if you're getting flow to that point, you know that there's always more flow upstream because of the way it loses. So if that's your critical kind of, you know that's your worst case location,
Yes.
and you know everything upstream is better, and that's how you're using it to manage that system, then it's okay. But in my analysis, you'll see that in a dry year, it's probably going to go dry at that point, with or without abstraction. So that flow site, you won't really know what's going on in the creek upstream. So, but that's an infrequent event too, so it might not be necessary. They'd be off at that time anyway.
And in your paragraph 72, I think reading elsewhere in your evidence that 2015-2016 irrigation season is the worst case scenario. Is that right?
For the data record that we have, yes.
Yes. Okay, and I'm still not clear at your paragraph 87 if 10 litres a second at State Highway 72 is enough for large eels to move stress-free up and down the creek.
Based on the observations that we did, I would expect if there was 10 litres a second there, eels would be able to move up and down comfortably. Yeah.
Okay, and then your paragraph 94, I'll just go there now. The last sentence, where it says these fish are likely to be more than 50 years old and would have been present through the recent dry period. Do you know if those eels were always present in the creek for 50 years or whether they came from somewhere else?
It's likely that they've come in there as small eels during a fresh or a flood event and remained there. Well, I would say a fair proportion of them. So they've probably been there most of their lives. Just the nature of that creek, the way it has no flows coming in from the Scottsboro and upstream, and then there's no flows out of the creek at the bottom. I'd say once they're in there, they're stuck there effectively unless there's a large flood event or flow. And for eels to come in, they probably need to be migrating at the exact time that there's a flow event leaving that system to allow them to move up into it as well, which is probably relatively infrequent. But, so I would say once they got in there, they're pretty much going to stay there until
so the chances are that they have been there for years.
Yeah, I would expect.
Okay, thank you. There's no more questions from me, thanks.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Hickey. Thank you for attending to our questions.
Thank you.
Come again to do that. Yes, Ms. Irving.
Yes, I'll call Mr. Craw next. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Craw. We have your statement and some appendixes that go with it. They're part of it. Thank you for providing those.
No worries at all. Thank you. Good morning, all.
We don't need you to read those, but is there any update or correction that you want to bring attention to?
No changes.
Commissioner Van Voorthuizen?
No questions, thank you.
Would I be able to make just a comment?
Yes, now's the time.
In my report, I obviously identify the financial implications that I've assessed underneath the different flows, but I guess the key point that I really want to hammer home, and it carries on from Mr. McIndoe's statement, is around the reliability or the reliability in water, which affects my modelling in terms of the variability of production and grass grown. That essentially, when farmers are looking at investing in irrigation, the way I often talk about it, it's an insurance policy to ensure that variability is removed. With what's proposed here at the moment, that variability essentially removes the benefit of having irrigation in the first place. So I guess I just wanted to really hammer home and bring the focus to that coefficient of variation and the real impact that has, and in the acknowledgement that at the start of any given season, we don't know if it's going to be an average year or a dry year, and the historical flows within the Coopers Creek, there's no consistency in terms of when it does go dry, so it makes it very hard to manage.
Thank you, Mr. Craw. Any questions, Commissioner Van Voorthuizen?
No questions, thank you.
Questions, Commissioner Solomon?
No questions from me either, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Craw, for presenting your paper and the appendixes, and for coming in to answer questions of which there are none.
No worries, thank you very much.
And our final witness is Ms. Johnston.
Thank you.
Good morning, Commissioners. How are you today? Long time no see.
We're coping with the week, Ms. Johnson. And good morning to you.
Thank you.
We have your statement too. And as you know, we would like to start with any corrections or updates that are necessary for you to give us.
No corrections or updates, but I wondered if I just might reiterate the key outcomes being sought by these submitters. The first point is obviously that we are carving out these three submitters from the greater Upper Coopers Creek catchment. There are obviously other consents that sit outside these three. We are obviously seeking ideally no minimum flow, but that the limit imposed would be an annual volume, which is 1.78 million cubic metres per year. But if the Commissioners were of the view that a minimum flow was necessary, then obviously based on the evidence of Mr Hickey, then that would be 10 litres per second plus that same annual volume limit applied, and obviously no pro rata restrictions. The annual volume would be in replacement of that. And then the allocation limit for the sub-catchment, as detailed in my evidence, would be 199.48 litres per second.
199.48.
Yep. Correct.
Thank you. So, any other introductory remarks, or
No.
do we go to questions?
Straight to questions. Yep.
Commissioner Van Voorthuizen.
First of all, thanks for reminding me of your appendix, page 7. If we weren't minded to impose a maximum allocation volume, which would be quite different from any other table in the plan in this regard, what would be the impact of the pro rata restrictions? Summarise that in a nutshell.
In terms of whether, if they were to be imposed, then based on the evidence of our previous experts here, then pro rata restrictions obviously has a reasonably big impact on the availability to these submitters as well.
All right, thank you.
Commissioner Solomon.
No questions from me, thank you.
No, nothing from me, thank you, Ms Johnson.
Thank you very much.
So, back to Ms Irving.
Yeah, I'm just going to take one moment to just look at something possibly in
Of
response
course.
to the
Yes.
Commissioner's question of Ms
It's
Johnson.
not a time for you, just take the time that you need to do the course properly.
Thank you, sir. My bright idea apparently wasn't so bright after all. I think that, I don't really have any further comments to make, perhaps other than to go back to, I think, your initial question about the relevance of the new national policy statement. And I think perhaps the other comment I wish to make in relation to that is that whilst it's clear from the drafting of particularly the objective that water bodies and the health of those ecosystems is the first priority, it isn't an absolute one. The NPS through the policy framework and the identification of the second and third priorities still anticipates an allocative regime. And so as a result of that, we still need to find a way, and I think I put it in my submissions in writing, of managing the tension between those two things. And what I would like to emphasise is how this submitted group, in developing the proposal that we have put forward to you through our evidence, is really borne that in mind, to develop a regime that has been able to, we think, protect the values that have been identified within the creek, whilst also enabling these submitters to provide for their needs in terms of the productive use of water. And we think we've struck that balance well. It perhaps requires a slightly bespoke approach, but I don't think that should count against us, and that what we are promoting is the most appropriate regime for, as I say, managing those tensions between the priority for those ecological outcomes and the allocative needs of the community.
Well, thank you for that, Ms Irving. The only aspect of it that I wasn't quite sure that I was fully understanding was when you started to talk about a balance. Now, my understanding, and I'm here to be informed by you and Mr Pearce, but my understanding is that that's what's different about the new NPS, that the first priority is that, and that gets filled. And it's only if there's anything left over after it's filled that anything in the second priority can have a piece, a share, and the same applies between 2 and 3. Now, if I've got that wrong, here I am, you instruct me and put me right.
Yeah, I think, maybe in saying a balance, it was a poor choice of words. I think that, I suppose it's the point I was trying to make when I say that need to provide isn't an absolute one. Because if it were, then you could almost never allocate water without having a consequence on the water body's health. So there has to be a line drawn between where we say a water body's health has been provided for in a manner that is, we say, is sufficient. And that's about identifying what values exist and the flow regime that's necessary to support those. And having done that, then you can allocate water to those other priorities. So I suppose what I'm saying is that we have, through our evidence, identified those values, and that those can be supported by the flow regime that we're promoting.
Well, thank you, Ms. Irving. I'll give that some thought.
Thank you, sir.
Now, is there anything else that you would want to say by way of closing your client's case?
No, thank you. We'll just prepare those tables for
Yes.
for you and submit those as soon as possible.
Yes, we're very grateful that you'll do that, and thank you. Thank you all for coming in. Thank you for presenting the case for the submitters, and thanks to the submitters themselves for coming in as well.
Thank you, everybody.
Now, does that conclude the business for this hearing, Ms. Fernando?
Yes, that does.
Well, then I'll announce that the hearing is now concluded, and the next hearing will be at the Wigram Base Hotel, Hornby, on Monday the 16th of November, starting at 10 a.m.
Yes, that's right.